In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can perform electronic music live without any laptop, any pre-recorded audio, just using MIDI controllers and synthesizers, and even a Game Boy. Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name's Kirsten, my artist name is Naoki, and I've recently written the book Performing Electronic Music Live. One of my chapters is about MIDI controllers because they really fascinate me. You've probably seen MIDI controllers that look like normal piano keyboards, and you may even be familiar with MIDI sequencers. But there's a whole range of other completely weird and wacky cool designs out there. For example, there's the Moog gloves, which are gloves that you can wear, and depending on how you move your hands, they generate a MIDI signal. Really totally awesome. There's even a MIDI jacket. And there's a crystal ball that measures the distance of your hand from the ball in order to generate the MIDI signal. So all of those things are totally cool and awesome. And if you want to find out more, I will link my book down below in the description so that you can check it out. So this tutorial video is about how you can perform live with MIDI and with synthesizers. We're not going to be using any laptop, we're not going to be using any pre-recorded audio at all. What I'll be using is basically a MIDI keyboard and a MIDI sequencer, the Squarp Pyramid MIDI sequencer. And I will use these two things in order to control two synthesizers, the Moog Sirin bass synth and a Vermona drum synth, and in addition another synth, if you will, which is basically a Game Boy. So that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be showing you a full performance at the end of this video, so please make sure to watch the whole thing. But first of all, I'm going to break down my setup for you guys, so let's get started. Okay, I'm going to start off by breaking down my setup, just giving you a quick overview before I'm going to delve deeper into the individual components. So my vision for this setup was to create a grungy, warehousey kind of rave sound with retro games console elements. This is what my setup looks like in practice. You can see a laptop here. I said initially that I'm not using a laptop. The laptop is really just there to capture the sounds. So it's not forming part of any of the signal routing, nor is it producing any sound. It's just connected to the mixer and it's literally just recording the overall output into Logic so I can actually show you guys what I'm doing. So here's my MIDI keyboard, which I'm using to play live on. So I'm actually sitting there playing notes, and those notes are routed into an old Game Boy Color. And because Game Boys don't have MIDI inputs, I've got this little box here in between the two, which is called an Arduino boy. And the Arduino boy takes MIDI in and then sends on a signal to the Game Boy that the Game Boy can read and transform into sound. So this is my MIDI keyboard. It's actually a Roland JDXA synth, but in this case I'm not using it as a synthesizer, I'm just using it as a MIDI keyboard. The reason for that is I don't actually own a large MIDI keyboard controller. I love collecting synths, and all my synths make perfectly good MIDI controllers, so I don't really need an extra MIDI controller. So it's really just there for demonstration purposes. This is a Game Boy Color, which is a model that was released in '98, so it's quite old, but it generates some very nostalgic bleepy bloopy sounds, which are fun. Okay, so there are several different ways of making music with a Game Boy. A lot of people use tracker software, but because I'm a keyboard player, I quite like the idea of playing keys and then routing MIDI into the Game Boy. So I got this Arduino boy from Catskull Electronics, and it comes with both this little chip, which is based on an Arduino little mini computer, and it also comes with a matching cartridge you stick into the Game Boy so that they can communicate. So you can see at the bottom right, the MIDI in comes into the Arduino boy, and then at the top you can see the cable that's connected to the Game Boy, and you can also see the power cable, and I'm just, for convenience, using my laptop to give it power. The Game Boy sound hardware has got 4 voices. So the first two voices are pulse wave, so I can have either a square wave or a pulse wave or something in between. Voice 3 is a wave channel. It allows you to loop a custom waveform, and then voice 4 is a noise channel. So you can see the four voices on the screen here, and you can scroll around to change the different attributes. So for example, I can change the waveform. I've got some control over the envelope of the sound. I also have a pan setting, which basically means it can come out on the left or on the right or both or neither. So you can use the different MIDI channels in order to send MIDI to the different voices. So for example, MIDI channel 1 will play voice 1 and MIDI channel 2 will play voice 2. MIDI channel 5 actually causes the Game Boy to cycle through the first 3 voices, which is great if you want to play chords. In the settings of the JDXA, you can choose which channels that the MIDI data is sent out on. So I made sure that the notes are sent out on channel 5 to be able to use all of the first 3 voices on the Game Boy. I also put a link down in the description where you can buy an Arduino boy. They're really great if you're a bit of a tech nerd like me and you want to play with retro game sounds. So the Game Boy Color is routed straight into the Allen&Heath mixer. It actually creates quite a noisy signal. And I think actually in this case that's part of the charm of what we're trying to achieve. We want to do a grungy, warehousey sound that sounds very much retro and rough around the edges. So I think that's part of the fun. Then I've got this Squarp Pyramid MIDI sequencer here, which is a really great tool. It allows me to program MIDI sequences for several different outputs, and in this case it's connected to a Vermona Drum synth and a Moog Sirin bass synthesizer. All of the sounds are gathered in this Allen&Heath mixer, where I can also adjust the volume and add a bit of reverb. So this is the Squarp Pyramid, which is a MIDI sequencer. It's got 64 tracks, so I can actually create 64 different sequences and put in all sorts of different settings for each, so it's a really powerful device. I'm going to turn it on and just give you a quick overview over what you can do with this. It would take me much longer to give you a complete breakdown of this sequencer, so I'm not going to do that in this video, but I'm just going to show you the functions that I'm using just to give you a rough idea of what's going on. So if I want to load my project, I can just navigate to load, and here's my project. So you can see here at the top there are 4 different modes. This is record mode, where you can record in things that you're doing live. This is step mode, where you can construct a sequence by putting in note values and chords and so on. This is track mode, so you can have up to 64 tracks. And for each track there are some settings that let you choose where you want to send that track to. You can see here at the back you've got several CV outputs, MIDI outputs. So you've got MIDI A and MIDI B, and they can be used in order to send different tracks to different hardware devices. Sequence mode, the 4th blue mode here, is not something I'm using for this particular setup, but it's another very powerful option. It allows you to create a sequence made up of tracks that are muted and unmuted at different points in time. At the moment I've got this overlay on top of the Squarp. You can also take it off, but it's quite helpful when you're learning it to sort of just understand what the different things do. So in track mode you can kind of mute and unmute tracks, so you can choose which one's playing. You can also go into the track settings, so you select your track by holding the track button and then pressing the track that you want to manipulate. And you can also change a number of settings up here. So the MIDI channel is, for example, for this highlighted track here, the MIDI channel is 1, it's coming out of MIDI B. So this is the signal that goes to my bass. I can also look at how long is this track, like, you know, how long is the sequence that I'm playing, how many steps are in it, what's the time signature, and so on. So I'm on the bass sound, I can head into step mode, and that will allow me to actually see all the notes that I've programmed in. So the length of this track is basically 4 bars, and you can see the notes for each bar. It's basically playing like an even rhythm of 8 notes. And the way that you can put these notes in, you could just head into live mode and play them in through the MIDI in here. Or you can also select the note that you want to put notes into, and then you can sort of like add the notes like this. Of course, you can change the note divisions and the note lengths if you want to. So at the moment it's set to 8 notes. So this is the bass. It comes out of MIDI channel 1, but it comes out of the MIDI B output. So in that way I can ensure that the signal for the bass is not being sent to my drums, but only to the bass. If I look at the drums, I'm going to just select this first track here. This is going to MIDI channel A. So out of here, out of the A output, the cable in my setup goes into the Vermona drum synth. And the second track here actually also goes into the same place. This is actually MIDI channel 2, but it also goes out of the MIDI A output. So both of these are being sent to the Vermona. The first track, I suppose, is a little bit more traditional in the way that I've approached it. It's basically just like the bass. You've got lots of different notes, and each note corresponds to a different drum sound, and I've just programmed in a little pattern that I wanted to play. No, but if I go to the second track for the drums, actually things are looking a little bit different here. And this is what I really love about this sequencer, because even though in some ways it's much more restricted than a computer, there are some functions here that you don't necessarily find in like a standard DAW. And one of those things is the ability to create Euclidean rhythms. For each track, I can say I don't want to just put in the notes in a kind of traditional way, but instead you've got these other options. So you can put in either the notes, you can put in chords, you can create a sequence of CC messages or effects parameters, or you can create a Euclidean rhythm. So that's what we've done here, and that's what this display shows us. So Euclidean rhythm basically is a rhythm where you define an overall number of steps, in this case 16 steps, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So those are 16 steps, and then you define a second value, in this case the 7, which means I want 7 out of those 16 steps to play a note. And the way that the Euclidean algorithm works is that it tries to evenly spread out these 7 steps over the 16 steps. And obviously it doesn't, because 16 is not a whole number multiple of 7, it means sometimes you've got 1 step that's empty, and sometimes there are 2 steps empty in between. So that actually gives you really cool and interesting, unexpected rhythms that you might not think of otherwise. And of course you can change, the number of steps, both the overall number of steps, the steps that you want to sound, and you can also change how the steps are distributed. So it gives you a lot of control, and it's just a slightly more unusual way to construct a rhythm. So this Euclidean rhythm that you can see here is controlling what the note C4 plays. And in this case, I've set it up so that C4 corresponds to the clap sound on the Vermona. So the kick and all the other drums are playing the programmed rhythm that I showed you, but the clap is playing the Euclidean rhythm. This is the Vermona drum synth that I'm using, and it's got a bunch of different drum sounds that you can synthesize yourself. So you've got these 8 rows which correspond to different types of drum sound. They're optimized for those kinds of sounds, and you can synthesize your own sound. For example, you can change the decay of the sound, the pitch, you can add some reverb or some noise, you can filter it, you can change the resonance, so you can build your own really nice analog sounding drum kit. Quite often it can be a little bit annoying to figure out which MIDI note corresponds to sort of which voice on a synthesizer, but Vermona have made this really nice and easy for us. So what you can do is you power the synth off, and as you're powering it back on, you at the same time want to hold the button for the specific drum sound that you want to assign to MIDI, and then you simply play a MIDI note. In this case, we'll play a note on the pyramid, and it will assign that note to that drum sound. So because I have these pre-programmed sequences for the bass and for the drums, I'm able to focus on what I'm playing on the Game Boy, and also I can play live with sound design parameters. So another way to perform electronic music is not necessarily to play the notes themselves, but to change some timbre parameters or some sound design parameters. So what I'm doing is that on the bass synth, I'm actually changing the filter cutoff of the notes in order to give it a bit more variation. And I've also got a reverb send here on the Allen&Heath, which I from time to time turn up to give the bass like a bit of a warehouse kind of ambience effect. Another thing that I'm doing is that I've just basically got my sequences looping all the time, but I don't want to hear them all the time, so I'm also using the faders on the Allen&Heath mixer to turn them up and down to create contrast. Alternatively, I could also mute and unmute the different tracks on my pyramid, but as with a lot of things in electronic music, you know, there's often several ways of doing the same thing. This was it for the explanation part of this tutorial. I'm now going to move on to the full performance, but I just want to say thank you so much for watching. And if you want to see more tutorial videos like this, please don't forget to subscribe, press the bell, and leave a comment down below and let me know what you're interested in. Have you ever performed live, and what did your setup look like? That's it from me for now. I'm going to show you the performance next. So thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye!